So what I'm going to try and do today is talk a little bit about the different kinds of societies, and then a little bit about Durkheim. That will leave for Wednesday a little bit of Marx and a little bit of Weber. On the plus side, I already gave you some of Durkheim and some of Marx on the first or second day, but we'll have to flesh their ideas out a little bit more. There's a good chance we're going to go over, not the least of which because I love this stuff. This is some of my favorite material in the discipline. But also, even though the book has all this stuff in one tiny little chapter, it's some of the absolute most important. 10 years from now, when you can say, yeah, I think I remember taking sociology at Middle Georgia, you should at least be able to think Marx, Durkheim, Weber. So you don't remember anything else, Marx, Durkheim, Weber. See what I'm saying? So we'll have to take a little bit of time to cover it. All right. The second thing I want to say is I love the paleo diet. Not because it works or not. I have no idea. That's up to you to go figure out. But the paleo diet as an idea has been around for what, 5-7 years now? And the guys that take that seriously, they don't just eat weird food, right? They take a whole lifestyle approach. They do weird exercise like climb trees and Lord knows what else. They take it into their sleep and they take it into, they're full on. Now again, I don't actually care much about what diet you peruse or pursue, and whatever works for you, great. The thing that interests me for this is because of the paleo diet, now all of a sudden lay people are interested in prehistoric humans for the first time in a very long time. Go Google up paleo on your tablet and you're going to have site after site after site of people talking about cavemen. That makes me excited. It's Flintstones meets iPod or something. Anyway, so what we're talking about here and what they're talking about is something specific. But what we're talking about here, I introduced on the first day, I talked some about industrialism because the industrial age is when the world that you now recognize started, and that's also when the discipline of sociology started. When we start talking about these theorists, today we're going to talk about Marx, Durkheim, and Weber, or this week. Marx was before sociology. He would have called himself an economist, interestingly enough, because Marx was living right through the middle of that. So if we go back to pre-industrial humanity, what does it look like? The first thing to keep in mind is human history goes very far back, much farther than, I'm always astounded when I rethink about this stuff. For me, old-fashioned is, stick shift, right? And maybe some of you never even learned how to drive stick shift because it's really old-fashioned, or phones with cords. I know, right? But in truth, this life, while it seems obvious, is only obvious because this is the life we're living in. If we go back 500 years, we've got Westerners in Europe living a very different life from us, but those are very certainly in our civilizational ancestry, if you will. With a lot of what we would come to recognize. If you go back 10,000 years, well, don't go back that far. If we go back 2,000 years, you can whip out the Bible, and most of old Jesus' stories are about farmers, right? So we go back 10,000 years or 2,000 years, and we're going to have reaping. We're going to have sowing first, and then reaping. We're going to have seasons. We're going to have a religion built around those seasons. It would be foreign to us, but in many ways it would be fairly familiar to us. You have to go back 10,000 years before you start getting out of agriculture. At about 40,000 years ago, you have this mind shift, which isn't in the book, but which I can talk about a little bit. Before that, we're talking 100 to 150 100,000 years of people with your brains and your bodies wandering around Africa, maybe the Middle East, maybe China. Depends on what the archaeologists have found lately. I'm not 100% certain, but you can look it up if you want. 100,000 years, right? And we think 500 years is a long time. It's just overwhelming when you start talking about these these time scales from a human perspective. Okay, so what do we really have when we're looking at this? Up until 10,000 years ago, people really were cavemen. Now, it doesn't mean they lived in the caves, but your image of a caveman as a hunter-gatherer, not bad, right? They were mostly nomadic because you would go to where the food was, and different plants are in season at different time of year, different times of year. The game moves throughout the year. And that's the vast majority of human time. Even if we go with the 100,000 year mark, if we go 10,000 years back to the beginnings of agriculture, notice that's 90% of humanity was wandering around in tribes. I say wandering, but don't take that in any way to be dismissive. The amount of knowledge that these guys would have had to find what was available to eat, to know what not to eat, to know how where to find game. I mean, anyone who's ever tried even fishing knows how hard it is to get the stinking fish. So to be able to come up with enough food, just lightly harvesting off of the land, is quite a lot of work. So that's kind of cool, right? All the way up, 90% of humanity. That blows me away when I think about it, because this is so obvious to us. Okay. Let's go with horticulture, which is third on the list, but happens a little bit before pastoral. So horticultural is the beginnings of agriculture. It's kind of like gardening. It's small-scale agriculture. And you can do it with a digging stick, one of the oldest tools in humanity, right? And a tool that every 4-year-old enjoys. Go outside and dig holes in the dirt with a stick. This allows for, when you start to have mastery over your food production this way, an interesting thing happens, right? You start to be able to build up something like a savings account of calories. And that's good because it means that when there's famines, not everybody dies, right? You've got a little bit of food left over. So you can see the appeal of learning how to grow your own food. Now, I've heard said, I'd have to look this up, so if you're interested, go find it. But I've heard said that they have found fermented grains at the very first sites of horticulture and agriculture, which is interesting because we could also posit a theory that beer started civilization. It's kind of entertaining to think about. You got your grain all piled up, and then it ferments a little, and well, we got to eat it, right? Hey, this stuff's good. Let's try it on purpose. But who knows? Nevertheless, that 10,000 years is the critical time for beginning to be able to grow your own food. So then you end up with the pastoral and the herding. And pastoral and herding, I'm not sure, now that I'm thinking about it, I should have looked this up before I started today. I'm not sure if this is entirely domesticated animals. Some of them are. Of course, a herd of animals needs to follow the seasons as well. So a herding group of people would follow the animals. But some humans lived off of animals that weren't domesticated. but they still followed the animals because that was their main resource. Interesting. Okay, now, 5,000 years ago, that's when we start to get to the real deal. Most serious human civilizations, and there have actually been a lot of them. This is, again, a little bit to do with the fact that we only live 80 or 100 years, if we're lucky, and everything here looks obvious. There's, when you think of civilization, well, there's us, there's Rome, I guess that was an empire. Japan might have had something. Well, the truth is that there were civilizations all over the globe, and something on the order of dozens of them, and they all rise and they all fall just like everything else. But they don't start until you end up with agriculture. And it's as simple as building up a surplus. If you're foraging, hunting and gathering, then you kill something, you eat it. There's not a great way to keep a lot of it around. If something's in season, you pick it and eat it. You're going to have a hard time storing it. And so you're limited by your shallowest calorie time period. So if February nothing's growing and you can't, and people are all hungry and starving, your population can't get any larger than that just because you have more food in July. Does that make sense? But as soon as you have agriculture, well, now we've got stores of grain. And in February, you can support that July population because you're eating food from 6 months ago. Now, the second part of this is not just that it builds a bank account of calories. The second part is that you also don't need everybody farming all the time. When you think of the great art of the world, likely you're thinking of, and it's not fair, but Grandma said life wasn't fair, you're largely thinking of paid artists in very wealthy civilizations. There's certainly folk art, but if you're a farmer and the only time you have to draw pictures is in the winter when there's nothing going on, then your pictures are only going to get so far, right? Because then it comes spring and you better get busy because you got to prepare for the season. And that's true for most everyone who, works for a living. But if you've got enough food saved up and you've got someone who's in charge of that food, right? Kings, queens, aristocracies, then you can actually have people who are devoted to art. And once you have that devotion to art, then you can start building all sorts of cool things. You can build pyramids. Now, granted, they're great big tombstones, but they're still with us. You can build Taj Mahals. You can, in the Dark Ages, quote unquote Dark Ages, that's unfashionable now. I have a lot of unfashionableness. Anyway, in the Dark Ages, there was still enough surplus to pay for monks, whole monasteries to sit around copying out the Bible and other important texts, right? If things had gotten worse, if there hadn't have been enough surplus to support monasteries and monks writing texts, we wouldn't have that component of civilization to reference, right? So in that sense, it's kind of obvious, I guess. On the downside, when you get to agriculture and the ability to have surplus, that's also when you start to have seriously divergent incomes or seriously unequal groups. You don't have slavery without an ownership class and a working class, right? And around here, we've got all these beautiful antebellum buildings. Well, it's only because there was enough surplus down here for these guys to spend what would be, in our world, millions and millions of dollars on housing, right? On estates. But don't think I'm picking on the locals. you go up to the Northeast, it's the same story. You go across to Europe and visit some of those old castle ruins, or even some of the ones that are still working, and it's because, right, it's because there's enough surplus, and someone moves in and takes it. It's inequality, right? Okay. Oh, and then that kicks over to the feudal system. You guys understand that. That's kings and queens. And from the Western perspective, that's the Western European feudal system. Although there were other feudal systems elsewhere, but this is what I can speak to. Now, the feudal system I find really interesting. I have daughters, and when they were little, they liked to dress as princesses, and it was kind of a challenge for me, because when I think of princesses, yeah, Ariel was cute and all as a fish, but if we're really talking about princesses, we're talking about people who are so ridiculously privileged because their families living off of absolutely everyone else. Well, you know, let me cry tears for Paris Hilton. I don't know what else to say. Of course, that's not what it means for the little kids that wear Disney, so dress as Disney. I don't. But yeah, crazy, huh? Okay. Now, let me mention the mind shift. This one's still a little bit speculative. And truthfully, most of what I'm talking about here is what we leave up to the anthropologists and archaeologists to worry about, because sociologists, we're post-industrial revolution, but you still need to know this. So, remember how I said there's 100 or 150,000 years at least of humans, your body and your brain? It seems that they might have had your brain, but not necessarily your mind. And this is really hard to wrap my mind around. Around 40,000 years ago, the archaeologists have found an explosion almost everywhere there were prehistorical humans of symbolism. Okay? Before 40,000 years ago, modern humans didn't necessarily bury their dead. They didn't necessarily make fire rings. They didn't necessarily make cave art. They didn't necessarily put flowers down with their dead. You know, acting more like other animals than what we might recognize as human. So the thought that's going along with this, is, remember how we talked about the social consciousness? We talked about building a socially constructed reality, how we're thinking in symbols and communicating in symbols. The idea that these guys are floating, again, around 40,000 years ago, is that we developed something like our modern mind, which allows us that ability to be symbolic. Okay? And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this example, but think of two dogs who are getting in a fight, right? First dog comes up, second dog doesn't like him, and they bare they bare teeth at each other, their hair all stands up. You've all seen it. Now, if I'm dog number 2 and I see dog number 1 snarling and his hair standing up on the back of his neck, I know that dog's aggressive. And that dog doesn't have any control over his display of aggression. And because I'm getting ready to fight, I'm displaying aggression. Makes perfect sense, right? There's no symbolism there. In fact, the bared teeth are aggression. They're not a symbol for aggression. Does that make sense? Okay. If my daughters start dating, and some nice young man comes to the house, and I just happen to have the shotgun in the corner by the door where he will see it, am I baring my teeth because I am going to kill him? No, right? It's a con job. It's a posed symbol of potential aggression. It's not actual aggression, right? It's completely made up. If you're in a bar fight, like I'm not real tall, I'm solid, but I ain't tall. If you're in a bar fight and you're 5'7.5" tall, at least one option is to act like the crazy one. Right? There's little guys who have no fear, who won't get hurt, who, or if they do get hurt, they kind of don't care. They're gonna, right? Now, I'd prefer to avoid a fight, but if by displaying symbols of ridiculously inappropriate, hostile aggression, if I can convince, the linebacker over here that he just doesn't want to deal with me, then I will have avoided the fight, right? Now, will I have avoided the fight by baring my teeth? No, because in fact, I over-displayed how aggressive I was going to be. You can also do exactly the same thing in business, just a sec, or politics strategically. Speak softly and carry a big stick. In car terms, it's the sleeper. Don't look aggressive, but make sure that you got the biggest weapon in the behind your back. So the other people aren't reading how aggressive you actually are. And if things get out of hand, you've got, a nuclear ICBM you can whack them on the head with. But hey, I'm a nice guy, right? So there's no way that a dog can think through those tactics and display his or her aggression in a various way. For me, all those manifestations of aggression are actually just symbols of aggression. And it's up to the other person to read how mad I really am, how likely to attack I really am, and how much they should prepare. This is sports. This is why we watch. This is business. This is international politics. But animals, at least hypothetically, can't seem to do this. So that's the difference between a symbol and a manifestation. The manifestation, it just is. You don't have control over. Whereas a symbol could be anything. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. That'd be kind of like trying to make yourself look bigger or louder or scare away a bear. Would that be actual aggression?
It's most of what we do is symbolic. Actual aggression is when someone gets in your face and you feel that adrenaline rush. Or I saw a woman spin her car out on the freeway a week ago. It was crazy. I'm driving along. She starts, drifting out of her lane like she's looking at her phone, which I'm sure she was. Overcorrects. And didn't smash her car, which is lucky for her. Didn't smash mine, which was kind of astounding. Now, the reason I tell that story is after that, I had to pull over because I had a flood of adrenaline, whoosh, right? And I could feel the sweat. I could feel my skin temperature was high and my hands were shaking, right? That's actual aggression. That's the manifestation, the animal side. But people who are really good can even control that. There's actually a little bit more on how we use those symbols in future chapters, but that's actually a good question. So here's why I bring this up, okay? That's just an example of aggression, okay? But the ability to tell stories, to convey information, the ability to use those symbols to actually build a language, it's great to try and psych out your enemy, but from the perspective we're trying to get at here, you can't have language like we have until you separate the manifestation of something, the is that is, and the symbol for it. But once you have that separation, you have a flexibility that allows for what we've been able to do with, what we've been able to accomplish in 10,000 years, right? 100,000 years, we're cavemen. Well, 40,000, right? So here's 60 or 70,000 as cavemen, 40,000 as language, symbolic people, and we've done pretty good, if that makes sense. So that's the mind shift. And, right now that's something that people are still writing about. That's something that the archaeologists are still studying. And part of the problem is that you're dealing with really, really old material that has to be dated, and you're guessing in an awful lot of things. What does this cave painting mean? But if there aren't cave paintings before that, that may, in actuality, be telling. All right. So this we talked a little bit about on the very first day. You don't have modern society without power. Just, that's it. If oil ever really ran out, we would be in serious trouble. If the coal ever ran out, we would be in serious trouble, which is why the hippies get so nervous about it. I understand why the hippies are nervous about it. I won't pick on them for that. But you're really looking at the 1900s. The earliest steam engines were in the late 1700s. I told you about the Newcomen engine, which was the one that was coal-fired to pump the water out of the coal mines so you could get more coal. I like that. It's a multiplying recursive system. See how it works? You want your money to work like that too. And people had been mechanizing things for a while, at least, at least in the West. I hate to keep going back to that, but it's our historical tradition, so it's where we start. There's other good stuff out there in the world too, so go read up on the Chinese, for instance, but that's over there. But the most power that was able to be had before fossil fuels was either animal or other humans. There were lots and lots and lots of slave societies and civilizations. Or you could also have water power and you could have wind power. So the Dutch made more Dutch land by pumping seawater out with wind power, right? If you go to the textile mills of the Northeast, I'm not sure about here. I know we had them, but I just haven't learned enough about Georgia yet. But next time you're up in Boston, swing by Lowell or some of the other textile areas. They were in place before the Industrial Revolution, and they were run off of mill wheels. The water ran, and you could run a textile mill off of that. You could run a flour mill, a grist mill, all sorts of things. But there was kind of a limit on what could be done with the kind of power that could be harnessed that way, okay? But the moment you put fossil fuels into that mix, you start to build that recursively increasing system. More power makes the system work better, so we can make the system work better, so we can get more power. So now we can further refine the system, and we can be more efficient, which means the power we have goes farther, so we can do more stuff. You see how it goes. So that in today's world, well, you all know about today's world. All right, now, part of what was crazy about that, and this is still going on nowadays, if you look at the population trends right here in Georgia, Atlanta is booming, right? Why? Because it's a city. That's where the work is. Down here's okay. We go out to South Georgia, where it's mostly agricultural still, and if anything, they're stable. A lot of the kids just up and move to the cities, right? Because that's where the economy is. Well, that move towards urbanization gets kicked off in the Industrial Revolution and is largely composed of people leaving farms, right? This is when Marx was writing. Those factories are pretty ugly. It was crazy, but that's industrialization. Now, again, I know that I talked a little bit about the Industrial Revolution on the first couple of days, so I don't know how much of this you need. Are you guys okay on this so far? All right, groovy. Now, this is where this gets kind of fun, at least for me, because I started thinking, well, what does this mean? Clearly, most of you don't work in factories, aren't in college because you plan to work in factories. The factories that are going up, they're not employing people anyway. They're employing robots. So what does that mean for us? Well, people will talk about this as the post-industrial economy. Sometimes they'll call it the third sector economy. Sometimes it's the information economy. But in today's world, we don't really need people to do work anymore. I mean, there are a few, but nothing like it used to be. In today's world, like I said, we use machines to do the work. We use computers to drive the machines. And the machines are getting scary good at it, right? If we went back 150 years, a handmade thing would still be better than the machine-made one. The machine-made one would just be cheaper. In today's world, when you get a handmade thing, even from an expert artisan, it's still often technically inferior to the machine-made thing. And the machines are getting more precise all the time, right? At some point, we're not going to have surgeons performing surgery. We're going to have surgeons performing engineering on the machine that's doing the surgery because it can be more precise, more precise. It's crazy. But that seems to be the way it's going. Even since 2008, we've had something of a mini manufacturing boom, which everyone was kind of hoping for because over the last 30 years, we've lost so much manufacturing to elsewhere in the world, right? But the new factories that have come have been run with machines. We started talking about this the other day, but Amazon warehouses don't have all that many people working for them. Even the old-fashioned warehouse worker is sort of gone. I can't imagine that an Amazon job was wonderful 5 years ago, but now it's not even an Amazon job, right? The machines get it off the shelves all themselves, and I don't know what the people do. Maybe they look in the box, make sure it's not smashed. You go ahead.
I was going to say, handmade stuff is starting to make like a big comeback now because people are now realizing, it may have been done quick by a machine and you put it together yourself, but it's not stable, it's not sturdy. The machine, it cuts and it makes parts for the bed and you put it together. It may last a year or so before one side of it breaks. Unlike, you get something that was handmade in the United States or something, and that thing will last like 10, 20 years. So.
Yes, but that's not the machine's fault.
Yeah.
That's the programmer's fault, right? Because, I love IKEA, but they could easily make it to be a little bit sturdier. Yeah. But you're right. I want you to keep that in mind because and again, this is projecting forward, but there seems to be kind of a boutique versus mass market economy emerging in all sorts of things. So you can get massive amounts of very cheap stuff at Walmart that's all made by machines somewhere. You could go to, what's better than Walmart? Target? Not really.
Sears.
Yeah, but Sears is going broke. But Sears is a decent example. But lots of good stuff is made at factories that are making better stuff, but it's more expensive.
By the time you spend that money on that expensive thing, like a bedroom suit, you spend $1,300 on it, that you'll get your money's worth, if it lasts, 20 years down the road compared to the $200 bed frame that you bought, put together yourself. So.
Absolutely. And this is where, when you're thinking about what you got to spend, and this really is going to matter, but it might not matter till we get to Weber. But when you think about that, when you think about spending several $1,000s for furniture, that's when you can start to say, Well, I could have this name brand stuff from, that again came from a factory, made largely by machines, or I could have a local artisan make it, somebody you actually know. But it's still a toss-up, right? It's just that that's really high quality stuff, no matter how you're going to get them. I used the bike example earlier, and I can speak to it because it's sort of crazy, but you can go to Walmart and buy a bike for $150, right? Yes. And it'll work, it'll keep the kids happy. You could spend $1,000, and that bike is still factory made, but is really nice, right? You can spend up to $4,000 or $5,000. You still have a factory made machine that's very, very nice, very nice. But if you're already in the $4,000 range, the top of the line stuff, then it makes sense to actually contact someone who's going to hand build you something that's going to fit. And that frame might cost you $1,500. Same thing with men's clothing. The very best suits, well, not the very best, who are we kidding? A really good suit, far better than any college professor gets to wear, might run you $2,000. And you know what? It came from a factory in China. Of course, it's made with the best material, and it's made with the best thread, right? And maybe it's fashionable, I don't know. But if you're going to spend $2,000 on a suit, then it kind of makes sense to start thinking about the local tailor, who's not going to have to tweak your pret-a-porter suit to fit your weird body, but he's actually going to make the suit to fit your weird body, right? But for everybody else, a $200 suit from Kohl's is more than they ever would have had, right? And that's where the IKEA comes in. $200 for that IKEA bed frame, and hey, look, we're sort of stylish. Otherwise, we'd be sleeping in a mattress on the floor. But the other thing is, and I want you to think about this, it's not just, oh, look, for the same price, we could have something handmade specifically for us. We like the weirdness, right? Part of the reason you would have a local person make you a bed frame is because it's going to have its own oddities, which is really strange. Think about art. Art's a great example. If we go back 300 years to before now, if we go back 300 years and look at art, there's no abstract art. If anything, the stuff is as photorealistic as possible. Why? Because people wanted to make it as close to real as they could, right? But when you end up with photography, and around the late 1800s, early 1900s, there's an intellectual movement which is a little bit, well, it's a different discussion. But it's also when Freud was writing, so there's that. Then art starts to get hazy and weird and not representative. And in today's world, when I can have a picture that has every single one of you in it, and I know exactly who you are just by looking at the picture, to be able to paint you as you are isn't the point, right? So the art we get now is actually weird, and we do that on purpose. Go ahead.
In some Oriental societies, knowing that people were not perfect, they would actually, into their tapestries, make a mistake on purpose.
I like it.
Just because they already knew that. You probably wouldn't notice it, but they did it just to get it out of the way.
Yeah. I like it. I do like it. It's sort of like when you get a new anything, but heaven forbid a new car, $35,000. How long can you park at the other end of the supermarket before, right, and walk a mile to get to the Kroger? Someone's still going to door ding it. And that first ding is so painful. But a 10-year-old car, you take good care of it. Yeah, it's got a few dings, but I like it. Okay, the imperfections matter, and that's going to come out here. The third and fourth points up there, am I counting right? No, second and third. We're only beginning to see what the digital revolution is going to cause assuming we have the power we need, and assuming like that we can keep up the growth we've got going, and there are plenty of people that think we can't, but again, we're not worrying about that at the moment. We're seeing computers increase at an exponential rate, right? Which means that this is more powerful than what the military had access to as mainframes 25 years ago. And it's in my pocket. This power nowadays we use to run gigantic algorithms that are too large to really think about. Like in the past, we'd talk about the art of medicine because it took a human and a human brain to look at a situation and sort it out. And right now, I'm sure you're aware of this, people are working on algorithmic medicine, for lack of a better word. They want to be able to go out into the field with this thing, take a blood sample, a number of quick samples, and have the computer do if then, 1,000 if-thens, and come up with a better diagnosis than a human doctor, right? Already there's jokes about it's better to let the computer land the airplane than the pilot. We talked about the potential for driverless cars, which is a little bit hard to imagine, but at a rate where things are doubling every 25 years. I mean, the fact that we have prototypes now means that within 25 years, our entire auto fleet is going to look different. Of course, that means that our cities will follow, blah, 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 blah. The reason I mention this is because, and I love this, because projecting forward, I mean, that the people who matter, whoever they are, they're already saying that you guys are going to have jobs that haven't been invented yet. And it's not going to be one or two different jobs. It may be 2 or 3 or 5 different careers, and they haven't been invented yet because of this accelerating pace of change. And it's that virtuous cycle, right? Because what we're building is more brain power. And as the brain power of the machines increases, the number of stuff that they can do increases, which allows them to test out more systems. And I mean, we're close to artificial intelligence, whatever that means, okay? Now, go back to that water-driven textile factory I started with. When the water drove the wheel in an old-fashioned textile factory, that wheel was connected to a conveyor belt, right? And the conveyor belts ran all over the factory. And so when you go visit these, you go do a tour on some of these, there are these long canvas belts hanging from the ceiling that were actually the drive shaft, if you will, for these old-fashioned factories. So when electrification came along, of course, the first thing somebody did was drop a big-ass electric motor right where the water shaft would have been. And then they ran the whole factory off of belts from the big motor. Of course, electricity is a different style, power than water, right? So it's got different strengths and weaknesses. That was just the beginning of electrification. Electrification hadn't progressed through the whole system until there were tiny electric motors at every conveyor belt throughout the whole system. And that took decades. And factories went from big, tall buildings, because they all had to be near that power wheel, to long, sprawly things, because you could put the power wherever you needed it, okay? So I want you to think about that, because this digital revolution is in its absolute infancy. We saw that it had effects on Sony, or at least music, right? We have seen some gigantic fortunes built on it already, but thinking it's done is a little bit like thinking electricity's happened because we dropped that BAM, big ass motor, where the water wheel used to be. Because eventually this is going to change. If it continues at this rate, it's going to seep in and change stuff that we don't even know how it's going to change. Yes, it's very exciting to think forward. And then that last little bit, I just put Gutenberg there. Who has a date for Gutenberg's press? One of you has to know this, because I don't. Y'all are in college, right?
1685?
Okay. Yeah, 16. We'll go with
1661.
All right. Super. It's like a, what do you call that? The backwards forwards thing? Very good. Thank you. So remember how I said that before, in the Dark Ages, books were copied by scribes, monks, sitting in the candlelight? Can you imagine how valuable a book would be if it had to be hand copied? Even in today's dollars, I don't know, what would it take to copy the Bible, to copy the entire Bible? Could you do it in a year? I don't think so. It's like several thousand pages, right? So let's say it's five years worth of work, and let's say we're paying them $20,000 a year to do it. You're looking at $100,000 in labor, and we haven't even made the calfskin pages yet, okay? So then along comes Gutenberg, and the whole reason you all are Baptists is because of Gutenberg. I'm not kidding. Why? How the hell can I say that? Well, with Gutenberg, the first thing, Gutenberg invents the printing press, movable type press. Very first thing he starts making is Bibles. Now, Bibles before that were so valuable that only the clergy really got to have them. And next thing you know, here's Bibles trickling out to regular people. And then somebody's translating it, and it's getting trickled out in languages that regular people understand. Okay? And one of the key components of the Protestant Reformation is it should be okay for you to read the Bible. Well, this is what I read. This is what God's saying to me through the Bible. This wouldn't have happened if you couldn't actually read the Bible, right? It's kind of astounding when you think about it. And so going from there to the rise of the Carnegie libraries, where everybody has a world-class education, just down the block, you just got to go to Carnegie and look it up. That's a tremendous democratization of knowledge that in a mere 300 years is kind of shocking. It means that you could learn whatever you wanted if you had to go to the library. And if you happen to live in Europe or the Americas or some of the places that Britain colonized. But today's world, not only, it's not like having the Carnegie Library down the street. With the internet, in fact, you have all of human learning throughout all of history, quickly indexed and text searchable, and do you have to be in the Americas or Europe to get it? No, right? Right now, something like half the world, maybe 3 billion people have internet access, and in the next 25, 30 years, 3 billion more are going to have internet access, which means everybody everywhere has access to everything that was ever learned. So again, just in terms of revolutionary potential, if Gutenberg could cause the Protestant Reformation, even inadvertently, and all of what that meant for Christian religions, what does the internet have in terms of revolutionary potential? And unfortunately, I'm not going to live long enough to see it. Hopefully I'll be looking down or up, trying to watch as the great sporting events unfold, because we are truly, when you think about this, I don't know how we're not standing on epochal changes in humanity. Does that make sense? But you have to think forward, because if you're not thinking forward, you could be the truck driver when Google's driving the trucks, and you don't want to be that guy. All right. We talked, now you're going to have to tell me a little bit. I know we talked about mechanic and organic solidarity, only I didn't use those terms. Again, this was one of the first couple days. Recall the conversation. Durkheim says that tribal people are held together by a shared mindset. They don't need each other in a knowledge sense. I mean, they might need each other's muscle power, but they all, for the most part, know where to find food, know where to find water, know how to make shelter. They're going to do okay if you drop them off in the wilderness alone. But they have this shared mindset, very, very similar mindsets. Durkheim calls that mechanic solidarity. And I always got this confused, I mean, seriously, even into being a grad student, because mechanics should be modern, right? And what he's trying to get at is what holds primitive societies together, again, this is Durkheim, is fairly mechanical. It's a simple machine, right? Whereas organic is much more complex than anything mechanical, especially in Durkheim's era, right? For as awesome as our computers are, have we beaten the cockroach? No, we still haven't gotten that far. We will at some point if things continue, but right now the cockroach is still a superior piece of hardware and software. We haven't even gotten that far. So the organic is much more complex, detailed, and in many ways effective. That's why the second one is organic solidarity. Basically, Durkheim saw that as we moved away from a world where there wasn't much to know, but we all were together because we shared the same mindset, to a world where there's too much for any one person to know, and we stay together because we actually need each other economically, right? For Durkheim, that's an organic solidarity that just grows out of the increasing diversification of society that happens through industrial revolution. But this all rings a bell, right? This is first or second day stuff. I know those of you who have suffered through my other courses have heard this at least once, but so collective consciousness, the second thing up there, I put group mind. It's sort of like the Borg or sort of like the hive mind. It's really a hard concept to wrap your mind around. And I have to point out that when I was going through college, the internet hadn't been invented yet. I know. And when Durkheim was writing, the internet hadn't been invented yet because it was like 1904. So when you consider what he's actually proposing, it's kind of revolutionary. You experience thought as what goes on in your head. And you experience society as other people. And other people can influence you. They can tell you what to do. You can argue with them. You can try and get them to do things. But very much you feel like you're dealing with a whole bunch of individuals. Okay? Durkheim is saying that there's something else. Okay? And this something else is affecting us even when we don't think it is. And in fact, it's always affecting us. It leads to much more of our thinking than you would ever get. It's so far out there that it's hard to even communicate, except for after the internet was invented. You all know that the internet is not connected to some big brain somewhere. The internet is nothing but all of our computers put together, right? And if I type something on this computer and it goes up into the world, it's just sitting on a server somewhere. But then someone else reads it and they retweet it, repost it, regram it. I just made up a word. Which is kind of hard because you have to screen capture it first, right? But at any rate, we put it up there and then it is out there and it's influencing other folks, right? In a world of the internet, it's not hard to express the collective consciousness, collective conscience, because it's the internet of our minds. Now, when you think about your phone, your little computer here, all the software on this thing came from the net, right? All the software on this. I'm sure that it had some naked BIOS on the day it was born, but right now I go to Play Store, download it, it came from the net. AT&T sends out operating system upgrades. It's like a culture upgrade if you're talking about a human. It downloads it off the net. Everything this thing has came from out there. Everything that's in your head came from the collective consciousness. Now, if this is an Android machine, it thinks in Android. If it's an Apple machine, it thinks in iOS. If you're a human machine, not a human machine, if you're an American machine, there's an 80% chance you think in English. If not, then Spanish. If not, then one of whoever your parents were, right? But again, you experience your feelings, your thoughts, your emotions. When you are thinking inside your head, you don't think, I'm using the words that my parents gave me. But of course, you're using words, and you weren't born with them there. You don't think, I'm thinking in the cliches that my culture gave me. But you know, it's been a hard day's night. It's a three-dog night. It's so damn cold, right? Poor Seattle, can't win them all. Well, actually, even the little tidbits, the cliches are in there, building all the way up. How many Muslims do we have in the room? Probably not many. Why? Because we're in South Georgia. Where'd you get your religion? From the net, right around where you are. Isn't that amazing? It's absolutely fascinating. And I would say that you could take that and go as far as really deep into your soul sorts of things. Which music makes you cry? It's not Punjabi rap, because that's not us, right? Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just, it makes somebody else cry. Probably my mom if I turn it up loud. But that's different. What do you think is sexy? Now that's a thing you experience pretty personally. But not really, actually. If you think so, and you're a guy, go find online like a 1985 Playboy, right? Or even better, because that's a little racy, but just a little. Even Playboy standard, mild by today's standards. Go out and look up, the music videos from 1985. Those were the sexiest young men and women. I have no idea how anybody replicated in 1985. Because they don't look sexy now. So even what makes you cry, your religion, what makes you horny, is coming from the outside? Holy crap. As my 13-year-old would say, holy crap. But then again, how much original thought is this little machine having? I mean, if you consider the deluge of bits and bytes that the internet is, several million letters I type over the course of my life. I mean letters, ABC. Does that add up to much? Nope. But it's a drop in the bucket, and the bucket is made of all of us. It's a wonderful metaphor. Anyway, I'm glad they invented the internet because it makes explaining Durkheim's collective conscience a hell of a lot easier. All right. I also talked a little bit about the guy who gets divorced, didn't I? Right? I'm positive. He walks out into the world and thinks, I'm not married. The world's full of beautiful flowers, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to pick each and every one of them. Right? I think I also mentioned a little bit the lottery winner. Lots and lots and lots of lottery winners end up worse off than when they started. Plenty of ball players who don't come from great situations end up in very bad situations after they make their millions playing whatever sport it is, or whatever Pop-Tart. It's pretty desperate for Vanilla Ice when he's doing reality TV shows because, right, he made some money and then it was gone. It's not just that people blow the money that comes their way. It's that in a world where you're living your life with a certain budget, right, that cap, that limit on human appetites, when you're living your life beneath that budget, beneath that cap, once that cap is gone, you're actually not happy. It's a very strange thing. That's one of Durkheim's assertions here. Now, so Durkheim thinks humans need norms they need laws, they need rules to actually help define their psyche, to give them something to fight against. It helps give them human meaning, okay? Well, now I'm moving into theory, obviously, but Durkheim's most famous work is Suicide. Durkheim was French, and so he was French. So collective consciousness or conscience is sometimes, the conscience collective. How's that for a bad accent? And suicide, if you buy it in France, is le suicide, and I can't read any of it. Anyway, it's 1897, turn of the century. What Durkheim's interesting, what he's doing here is interesting, because remember how I just said what you think is sexy, what you think, the music that'll make you cry, your relationship with God are all personal things. You know what else seems like it ought to be personal, but maybe kind of isn't? Suicide. And if you were trying to, and of course in a room this big, someone has been touched by suicide, so my sympathies. But Durkheim's largely talking theoretically here. If you are the proponent of a brand new discipline of the anthill, and you're trying to make the case that that discipline is a legitimate scientific pursuit, one of the best things you could do, right, would be to illustrate that even the most individual thing you could do as an ant is affected by the ant hill, okay? And even nowadays, when you hear someone commit suicide, someone like Robin Williams, and there have been a few around here, just locals, which is kind of sad, and again, you guys know these people, you say, what was wrong with him? Why was he so sad, right? We're wired to treat suicide like an individual problem. And if this is your family, it obviously is experienced as an individual problem. But that's not the way Durkheim's looking at this. Durkheim stands back and says, well, if human misery is equally spread out, right, amongst humans, then, and the propensity, there we go, the propensity to commit suicide is equally spread out amongst humans, then we wouldn't expect there to be a difference in societies or communities. We wouldn't expect there to be a difference in the suicide rate. Okay, so it's not how unhappy was Robin Williams. It's actually larger than that. What's the American suicide rate? And he measured this in terms of like X per 100,000, because that's how you got to do it to get any sort of relevance. All right. Now, this needs to be redone, and so this study is 100 years old. So any of it is likely, may well have changed. But I'm trying to give you his argument so that you can kind of see what he's saying. If he's over in Europe, he's looking through court documents and church documents to try and get a sense of when people committed suicide so that he can build statistical tables. He's trying to do this statistically, like actually with numbers, and not with a computer. Run, regression, click. No. Pencils and grad students. I'm glad I wasn't his grad student. Do regression, here's a pencil. No. Okay. So one of the first things he looks at is climate, right? If we're thinking of Europe, and you could live down in Greece, who's going to commit suicide? The weather's beautiful, the wine is awesome, the food's great, the men and women are beautiful. It's, there might not be a lot of employment, but sit around and drink wine, it's a good life. And we know that Scandinavia, 6 months of the year, the sun doesn't even shine. What a miserable place to be. And on a warm day, it's 55, 60 degrees out. Awful place. Awful place. So we know that the Scandinavians are going to have a much higher suicide rate than the Mediterraneans, right? Well, he tests that, and the answer is no. Okay? And he goes through a whole bunch of different things that are just like that, trying to, disprove all of the folk theories of suicide, if you will, the sort of lay theories. And he ends up settling on two sorts of things that matter. And let me pull this up. Google Docs is getting better. It even read the animations. Okay. He ends up saying that you have these two sort of axes, if you will. One is moral regulation, and the other is social integration. Okay? I'm trying to do Durkheim in 15 minutes, and it's kind of like when they take a good movie with lots of nudity and bad words and put it in 2 hours on primetime TV with commercials, and they take all the meat out. I feel like that's what I'm doing here. But that's okay, because you can ask questions next time. Okay, so he focuses on these two elements, this social integration and moral regulation, saying that this is actually what matters, not for the individual, but for the group. Now, what does he mean by these two things? Well, social integration, in today's terminology, we might call social capital. How much are you actually tied in with the other people of your group? Okay? And moral regulation is what it sounds like. How much are you keeping an eye on each other's behavior? Okay? And he ends up focusing on the difference between Catholics and Protestants and men and women. But let's talk about the Catholics and the Protestants. He makes a case, and I'm not 100% sure, but he makes a case that the theological perspective on suicide isn't that different, right? Every Catholic, when I'm teaching this at Catholic schools, they're like, well, yeah, you're not supposed to kill yourself. Duh. But I don't really think Protestants are supposed to be killing themselves either. I mean, I'm just saying. And Durkheim says, no, they're not. So why the difference? Well, this is where these two axes come in. And notice the Protestant Catholic difference, because this is going to play across the other theorists we'll talk about on Wednesday as well. Definitely the Protestants will. So, you remember that tidbit I said about learning to read the Bible on your own? If you are a pre-Protestant Christian, by definition, you're Catholic. And they have this hierarchy. They still have this hierarchy. And if you're ever really unsure of how you should behave or what you should think about a thing, they have books you can look it up in, and it says the official church teaching is, and that's it, period. And you can go talk to your I almost said preacher, your clergy about it, your priest, there we go. See, living down here is catching up with me. You can go talk to your priest about it, and, he might tell you his personal perspective, but for the most part, they're going to hew the party line. This is what it is, okay? You're not really allowed a ton of divergence. I had a friend once describe it as your priest in Catholicism is your God lawyer. You don't have to argue with God because you're going to lose. You let your priest step in and he can mediate with God for you, okay? In Protestantism, your God lawyer is gone, right? You have to read the Bible on your own damn self and figure it out. And you can ask your clergy, but then instead of being like your lawyer, he's more like a consultant. He's an advisor. Well, here's what the church thinks. But if you disagree with the church, you really think the church is wrong in your heart, that's between you and God, and that's actually completely okay. Well, notice what that does to both integration and regulation, okay? In Catholicism, you got to go to church every dang week, no matter what. Missing church is a sin. You're going to hell. I'm not kidding. in Protestantism, if you honestly can't find a church that aligns with what the Spirit is telling you when you read and interpret the Bible, there's no point in going to someone else's church. Not only do you not have to go to church, see, now I got that pop song playing in my head. Not only do you not have to go to church, you really ought not go to a church that's leading you off the path that you honestly feel is the right path. Okay? So immediately look at how there's less integration there. I mean, how many people are you bumping into on a daily basis if you are doing church by staying home and reading the Bible? And there are plenty of people that do that. It's a completely legitimate perspective from the Protestant side of things. But from the Catholic side of things, nope, you all got to suck it up and be here anyway. Okay? The same thing happens when you think about moral regulation. Okay? Again, how you behave is between you and God. I don't know about you, but God does not talk back to me often. Right? I mean, yo, Gibbons. No, right? So I gotta guess how I think I should behave. I gotta interpret how I think I should behave. And then I gotta have faith that I'm behaving the right way. And if I screw up, it's on me. Now, go ahead.
So it's like sociology. For instance, now in the military, a person has PTSD, they send them to a sociologist versus a psychologist.
That would be awesome, but I don't think so.
Yeah, they do it in Germany now.
Sweet. I'm going to Germany.
Big hospital, American hospital.
That's interesting.
Sociologist versus a psychologist.
I would like to hear more about that. That is interesting. Yeah. All right. Hold that thought. I love it. Okay. So in terms of behavior, right? In Catholicism, I grew up Catholic. I think I told you that. You're going to hear lots of Catholic examples. My mother, we had this neighbor. I mean, I was like, 14. And I think he was actually a college professor of music. And she would peek out the windows, and there'd be a girl's car in his driveway. And she'd say, Kevin, I'm just so worried about him. I just don't think he should be having girls over all night long. I'm 14. I'm like, leave it alone, Mom. Who cares? Right? Seriously? What business is Kevin's sex life of my mother's? It's not, right? But if you live in a world where you're all bumping into each other all the time, and you're paying attention to, right? Because if you're not in church on Sunday morning, they're going to notice and they're going to tell you. And when you're not sure how to behave, they're going to tell you how to behave. You're not going to the Bible and looking it up. And when you screw up, if you take Catholicism seriously, you're not off the hook until you go and you sit with Father and you say, Father, I have sinned. I cheated by copying a patch into my Battlefield game. Right? I stole some intellectual property and I cheated on my wife. Now, to non-Catholics, they look at that and they kind of go, well, that's a get-out-of-jail-free card. And in some way it is. But think about how humiliating it is to sit in front of someone and tell them actually what you did wrong. Right? It's pretty humbling.
That's how it is over in Ireland. Like,
There-
there's nothing going on over there really, so everybody knows everybody's business and everybody's kind of, they're all in the same little town, so I mean.
Yep. Yep. They're Catholic. All right. So we're just about out of time here. So what I wanted you to get from this, and I'll upload the video or the slides. Durkheim's whole point is when that integration is low and that moral regulation, then a community actually suffers from anomie, right? There's not that guidance. There's not that constant interaction. And the suicide rate is going to be higher, completely regardless of the individuals, right? The misery's the same, the happiness is the same, but the moral regulation and social integration is different, and the one with less of both of those has a higher suicide rate. That's the long and the short of his argument. All right, thanks. We'll see you Wednesday. And any questions, go ahead and write them down.
There's one other thing that I wanted to bring up was as far as like industrial and everything.
Yes.
You know, craftsmen. I didn't, used to you bring in like an old rusted craftsman tool, they'll replace it.
Right.
They still do it.
Do they still?
My husband.
I've got some busted craftsman stuff.
He had some rusted up vice grips, and he went over to Sears, and they gave him a brand new pair. They
That's awesome.
do it to this day. So
That's cool.
I mean, it's amazing that they still honor that, because a lot of people they change it. Just like with the electricity, a lot of people don't change their, like with wine and liquor. They like the old meal
Yes.
and stuff like that. So
It's going to matter when we end up talking about Marx, but mostly, like Weber's the one who's most deeply on top of that,
Yeah.
and it's cool.
yeah,
It's cool.
I'm all into that. And also, like, I'm not directly from Ireland. I have ancestors we came from Belfast. So
Okay.
I'm not Catholic. I'm Baptist.
Right.
But still, I have.
Wait. Oh well, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're here.
Yeah, I'm here.
It rubs off on you.
Yeah. So, but I have ancestors that came from Belfast, because like, I don't know. I've always wanted to go to Ireland and look deeper, because when I do the ancestry thing, it stops at Belfast, and they say, well, you got to go over there
Yeah,
and
you probably got
finish
to go over there.
it. So.
That's fun. That's awesome.
But it's amazing, like, I see how they act, and it's like, holy cow, I'm not directly bloodline, but I have a lot of the
That's
quirks and everything of a.
Yeah, that's the cultural bit, and isn't it fascinating?